This episode is brought to you by Americas Rehab Campus. Get on the road to recovery with the best rehab in beautiful Arizona. Dial 1-833-272-7342. That's 1-833-ARC-REHAB.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are now tuned in to the Archer.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Arcast. My name is Buddha. I am joined here today with my friend
Michaela.
Good morning, Miss Michaela, and
Vance Johnson.
Vance Johnson. Always a pleasure. It's good to hear from everybody today. I've been thinking and trying to ponder on how to say this. I'm very, very blessed. We have a very special guest today. I consider this woman to be a staple as far as art goes. She's been here for such a long time. She's a good friend of mine, a good friend of yours. Ladies and gentlemen, I would love to introduce to you guys to the HR manager, Miss Cassie. Cassie,
Hi.
Good morning. How are you doing today?
Good morning. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. It's great to have you here. You know, this podcast has... We've done a few episodes. We've had some amazing people come in here. We had Ray, we had Ann, we had Anthony, a bunch of different people coming and sharing their testimonies. And, you know, the last couple times that we've done these episodes, I got chills the last few times because I really feel like God is using everybody to come together and help other people heal, you know, through some of the things that they've experienced and stuff. And, you know, I was excited to have you here, Miss Cassie, most definitely. So I wanted to see if maybe you wanted to jump right into your story a little bit. Let us know a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So good morning. My name is Cassie, and ultimately I'm an addict. My drugs of choice are heroin and meth, and my clean date is August 3rd, 2017. I think it's important to start off with my story, you know, where it all began and how I came to become an addict. I think it's important for everybody to know that addiction can come to you no matter what walk of life you come from, whether it be poor, wealthy, no matter your circumstances. Everybody is at risk of becoming an addict. And it's really true in my story. I was born and raised in Scottsdale, Arizona. My parents were pretty well off, wealthy people. My dad was in the real estate business and did very well for himself. And I had a really good life, really good childhood. I grew up riding Arabian horses, which is a really important part of my life. Wow. And was at that time. I was really lucky to be able to live a life like that. Two brothers who were very involved with hockey, and from the outside, we looked like we had a really good life, which we did. Now, I believe that the disease of addiction is a disease, and that ultimately it comes from genetics, and I believe that I have the gene of addiction that stems from family members having addiction prior to me being born. So, you know, although I did have a very good life growing up, there was some addiction in the home, and I didn't know it at the time that that's what was going on. But as I got older, I started to realize some of the things that were going on that just weren't necessarily normal. And I think at an early age, I started to realize that there was something different about me, and that I struggled. As a young kid, I didn't know what it was, but definitely with some depression, suicidal ideations, and things like that. Again, at the time, I didn't realize that that's what was going on because I was so young, but that started about 9 to 10 years old. I remember just feeling so much pressure that I had started cutting at a very young age, around that age. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I was, you know, experiencing some mental illness. And so I was already pretty troubled. And growing up, it continued to get a little bit worse as far as mental illness goes. And I always knew that, you know, there was something off, and I didn't necessarily want to be present. And so I had an older brother, and he was a couple years older than me, and he had started partying a little bit. You know, I smoked weed for the first time with him when I was fairly young. I started partying with him a little bit just because I thought it was the cool thing to do. This was around 12 years of age. And then when I was about 13 years old, I experienced some sexual trauma in my life by a family friend that completely set me off. I was not educated in sexual trauma at that age. Obviously, never expected anything like that to happen to me. And so from there on out, at the age of 13, I was introduced to what I considered the evil side of life. I started to go down a bad path after that point in my life. I didn't know it, but I did not want to be present. I did not want to be aware of what was going on around me. And I kept that incident a secret from my family for a very, very, very long time. And the person who did this to me was still in my house every day, and I just never told anybody. So it was something that ate me alive every day. And so by the time I was a freshman in high school, it was right before me going into my first year of high school. My dad was in the real estate business, and like I had said, we were in a multi-million-dollar home. I was a very blessed child. The market crashed, and my family lost everything. So we went from living in a very expensive home in Scottsdale to being completely homeless as a family. We lost everything. So my brothers stayed somewhere else. My parents lived somewhere with a friend. I lived with them. Everything came crashing down. Very shortly after that, my dad, who is just the most amazing person in the world to me, he was diagnosed with cancer. And this was just after he had lost everything. So he didn't have health insurance. He couldn't receive treatment for his cancer because we had to pay out of pocket for it. And I was going through, becoming a teenager. So by the time I started my freshman year at high school, I decided I did not want to go to a high school in Scottsdale. I had a very big resentment against kids that were wealthy, that still lived in Scottsdale because my family had just lost everything. And I didn't want to go to this school where I thought everybody was stuck up. They didn't understand what I was going through. And so I convinced my mom to let me move to a different high school. And it was a high school in Phoenix. And I started going to high school. I was 15 years old. And very soon, I was already smoking weed every day by the time I got to high school. My girlfriends and I partied. We did Xanax. We drank, whatever. But when I moved to this high school, I met some people that were a couple years older than me. And I was really intrigued by them. I thought it was really cool to hang out with older people. I was going through this stuff in my life. I didn't want to be at my house because my dad was ill. So I became friends with these people. And very shortly after becoming friends with them, I would hang out with them every weekend or after school. And they lived in a not so nice part of town of Phoenix. And I thought that was cool because I had lived my whole life in Scottsdale around rich people. I'd never experienced a life of what some people would consider lower class or kind of ghetto, whatever you want to call it. But I was very intrigued with that. And so my friend introduced me to some guys who were very much older than me, and they sold drugs, and I thought they were the coolest people I had ever met. I started dating one of those guys, and within a couple days of dating him, he introduced me to heroin. I smoked heroin with him for the first time, and after I remember sitting in the bathroom smoking heroin with this guy, I instantly had all of my problems solved. All of the pain that I had felt, everything I was trying to hide, that worked for me. Smoking heroin worked for me. I didn't realize it, but I became addicted instantly. So within 3 days of hanging out with this guy every day, I was physically dependent on heroin. And again, I was 15 years old, and I didn't realize, obviously, how fast that could happen. But at the time, I thought it was cool. I thought it was cool that I was doing heroin with this guy and that I had this secret life. And about a week later, I injected heroin for the first time with a needle, and it was all over after that. I started to live this life that I didn't even realize was out there. And I got so wrapped up in it so quickly, and it all stemmed around, hanging in with these guys. But at the time, heroin was really the only reason that I was still around, because that's the only way I knew how to get heroin. And so I was doing heroin at school every day, getting it and doing it before school every day. My parents didn't realize, because I was going to hang out with these people after school every day, spending the night, going to school with them. I would be there on the weekends. Obviously, I couldn't maintain that for very long without them, noticing that something was wrong. And so Around my 16th birthday, my dad had become very, very ill. And like I said, we had no money to support his cancer treatment, so we were doing lemonade stands, fundraisers, trying to collect money to get treatment for him. And it was just destroying me because I love my dad so much. And so my parents finally found out, and 16 years old, I was sent off to my first rehab facility. I was sent across the country to do this treatment center. And at the time, I was young and naive, and I didn't realize that, like, the extent of it. I was like, okay, I'm going to go over here. Everything will be fine. But I never in my mind was like, I need to stop doing drugs. I was just doing it to appease my family. And so 30 days I was at this facility, and then I come home, and my dad picked me up from the airport. And it had only been 30 days since I had seen my father. And he picked me up at the airport, and I walked right past him because I didn't recognize him because he was so sick, dying. And just skin and bones, I didn't recognize him, and it was very shocking to me, and that set me off. So as soon as I got home, I started using again, and I was extremely freaked out by how sick my dad was, and I didn't want to feel any of it. So I continued to use throughout my high school years. It was extremely hard for me to maintain going to school and being addicted to heroin, especially as an IV user. You get extremely sick, and I just continued to live a life of crime and what I thought was cool partying, but really I was just doing heroin with some random guys every day. And I started being introduced to that lifestyle, and I became addicted to the lifestyle as well. And I hated everybody in Scottsdale, and that's, where my parents lived, and I didn't want to be around there. So I avoided it at all costs. And I lived as a teenager addicted to heroin for quite some time until I turned 18 years old. And throughout those years, it got extremely hard. I quickly realized it was only cool for so long, and then you're introduced to a very, very cruel world. And I realized that, but then I was too deep in. I was way too physically dependent. There was way too many things that had happened to me throughout that time. A lot of trauma just with being involved in that world that I had no plans on quitting, but I knew that I was in big trouble. And so by the time that I turned 18, one of my friends or, drug buddies or whatever moved to Florida, and she said, because my parents were starting to come down on me pretty hard, and I said, I'm 18 years old, I'm leaving. And so my friend bought me a plane ticket, and I moved to Florida, and she had convinced me that she moved to Florida and got clean, and I moved there, and that was not the case. So I started using very heavily in Florida, and I ended up meeting a guy, and then I moved around a little bit. I moved from Florida to Tennessee and to Texas with this guy, and once I got to Texas, I became pregnant, and I was still very sick in the head. I was being physically abused by this man day in and day out, basically being held captive in this man's house, and I wanted to go home really bad. And I hadn't been home in a while, and I was pregnant and experiencing some extreme trauma. And so I finally convinced this guy to let me go home. My dad had helped me create these fake plane tickets that showed that I had a flight there and a flight home, but I really only had a flight there. And so he let me go. He thought I was leaving for a 3-day weekend to go see my family. But I got home, and I didn't go back, obviously. I was still using heavily, and I was pregnant. And I finally, when I got home, I told my parents I was pregnant. And then, very quickly after that, they realized I was still doing drugs. So I decided, okay, I'm going to get clean for this baby. In my head, my baby was going to solve all my problems. Once I had this baby, she was going to make it so that I didn't want to do drugs anymore. And unfortunately, that wasn't the case. And so I had my baby, and I was devastated at the fact after I had my baby that looking at this sweet baby didn't take away the disease of addiction in my head. I was in a lot of pain emotionally, and I started using again very shortly after I had my baby. And so it was before she was even a year old. I would say she was about 6 months old. when I left my parents' home again. I left her with my parents because I was using in the house with her around, and she was getting a little bit older, and I couldn't handle the pain of knowing that she couldn't cure my addiction, and I was still using, and it just hurt too much. So I signed over guardianship of my daughter, and I left, and I never went back. And from there on out, my disease spiraled way worse than I could have ever imagined possible. At that point, I was an adult, and at that point, I was living on the streets. So I learned very, very quickly how to survive living on the streets, and that's exactly what it is. It's surviving. It is absolutely the most miserable thing that any human could possibly experience. And in the Phoenix heat, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, just doing whatever I could to get a little bit of heroin to make it through the day. And I slept in a park at night, and, I had several acquaintances that would, let me sleep on their couch every once in a while. But ultimately, I was homeless in the streets of Phoenix for a long time. And very shortly after that, I was introduced to meth. And heroin was always my number one drug of choice, obviously, because I needed it to be well. At that point, I wasn't getting high anymore. I was just using it so that I wasn't sick. And then I was introduced to meth, and I realized that meth gave me the energy that I needed to survive on the streets. And it gave me the energy that I needed to make it through the day in the Phoenix heat. But that also came with a lot of paranoia, and meth did not mix well with me, especially living on the streets. I didn't sleep much as it is. So I would be up for about 7 days at a time, walking aimlessly on the streets, just doing whatever I could to get by. And I was very, very ill in many ways, mentally, physically. I was constantly in and out of the hospital because of skin abscesses and things that come along with addiction. And then I'll never forget, on my 21st birthday, I was extremely sick, and I thought it was due to the fact that I hadn't had any heroin in a couple of hours. And fortunately, there was some girl at this trap house that I was at that made somebody aware that I needed to go to the hospital because I was pretty much unconscious. And so the next thing I remember, I was waking up in the hospital fighting for my life because I had endocarditis in the heart, which is basically like a staph infection in the heart. And I didn't realize how close to death I was, but luckily for this random girl at a trap house who convinced somebody to drop me off at the hospital doors, she saved my life, which is interesting. But I was hours away from dying, the doctors told me. And the only thing that I cared about when I was there is how is somebody going to make it so that I'm not so sick from being dope sick. They considered doing open heart surgery and replacing some of the valves in my heart. And ultimately, they were able to get me on some medication after several weeks in the hospital that they didn't have to do that option. But after several weeks in the hospital, they put me on methadone so that because I kept threatening them, I'm going to leave if you don't make me feel better. And all I could do when I was in the hospital is I was texting everybody I knew to bring me dope in the hospital. That's all I cared about. That's all my mentality was. And so I was set to what is considered a sniff after this because I had a valve that pumped antibiotics into my system like 3 times a day that I had to be on for about a month for me to be able to live. And so I had to go to a sniff because they don't trust drug addicts to have one of these valves in their arms or whatever. And after about 2 weeks in this sniff, I was just sitting in this bed, and my family would come see me, and I just didn't care. I wanted to use. That's all I cared about, and that's all at this point that I knew. And so after a couple weeks, I ripped everything out of me, and I just walked away. And so I'm very, very lucky to be alive when it comes to that sense. And that's just one instance where I was almost lost my life to the disease of addiction. So throughout this whole time, my family had set boundaries with me, which I understand. And I would see my daughter maybe once every 6 months. My dad would bring her to a park and let me meet with her. But she wasn't very familiar with who I was. And my dad during this time was able to receive treatment for his cancer and made a full recovery, which was great. So during all this time, I had made attempts to get clean, but I wasn't mentally wanting to get clean. It was more just like, oh, I'm about to get arrested. I should probably go do something to try to curb that from happening. Or I would get some brief moment of clarity and decide to go into a detox, for my daughter. But it was never for myself, and I would never last long. So I'd go to a detox facility for 3 days. My dad would pick me up, and I'd tell him, all right, drop me back off here. And it was a trap house. So I never really had any plans to stay clean. And no facility really ever worked for me. And so in June of 2017, I contacted my dad, which I did not contact my family very much. I didn't have a cell phone. I would call them every couple of months just to say, hi, I'm alive. And then that was about the extent of it. And I called my dad this one day randomly, and I said, hey, Dad. And I hadn't talked to him about 3 months. And he said, oh, my God, I can't believe you called me. He's like, I'm actually at a facility right now in Tucson that's a treatment facility, touring it. And I was in the middle of giving a speech to all these investors about how my daughter hadn't called me in 3 months because she lives a life of addiction, and you just called me. And he was crying, and it was kind of like a God shot because I had no idea what my dad was doing for business at this time. I hadn't been in contact with him about that kind of thing. And so he kind of planted the seed in my head at that time that there was this place called the Ark, that it was a new treatment facility being opened up, and that at any time I decided I wanted to try to get clean, that I could come here. And I was getting so beaten down at that point that the only thing I wanted at that point in my life was to die. And I couldn't get the heroin to kill me because obviously I'd been trying for so long. This was my mental state at the time, is that I was going to be just so miserable doing this for the rest of my life. And I came to a point where I was like, I need to try something else. And so I came down here to the Ark, and that was my first attempt at trying to get clean here at the Ark. And when I got here, I didn't realize it because of the state of psychosis I had been in. The meth put me in states of psychosis for long periods of time, and obviously I didn't realize it at the time because I was in psychosis. But my dad dropped me off at detox, and I was in an extreme state of psychosis. And I guess I had some really bad health issues going on. And I was sent out to the hospital, and I had another brief hospital stay. After being in the hospital, they brought me back here, and I decided I just wasn't ready. So I remember telling the techs in detox, I said, let me out. And I was one of the first clients in the facility. So they tried really, really hard to keep me here. And bless their souls, they all still work here today. And I talk to them about it frequently, about how the look on their face, how hard they tried to get me to stay. And mind you, I'm from Phoenix. I was now in Tucson. I didn't know anybody here. My dad dropped me off. I had nothing to my name, didn't have a cell phone, and it was summertime. So I said, I don't care. I want to go use. And they let me out the door. And I remember one of the really good BHTs here, he gave me about 6 water bottles. I had a backpack. He gave me about 6 water bottles. He said, please be careful. And I started walking. 10 minutes into my walk, I found somebody who I became friends with and started using drugs at their house in about 15 minutes from leaving this facility. I stayed here for about 2 weeks with some random person. I could not even tell you their name now. And eventually I found my way back to Phoenix and instantly hit the streets again. But the seed had been planted in my head after being at the Ark the first time for a little bit, that was an option and that I didn't have to live like that anymore. Even though I couldn't figure it out yet, I just knew that was in the back of my mind. I spent a couple more months on the streets at that point, and it only got worse. It felt like it got 10 times worse if that was even possible. I was getting in a lot of trouble legally, and eventually on August 3rd, my dad took me back here. He took me back to the Ark. And I remember I was in the car with my dad. I weighed about 85 pounds at this point. And I had some drugs on me. And I asked him to stop at a rest stop before we got here all the way. I'll never forget the last time I used heroin in the bathroom, and I threw away everything I had in that bathroom trash can. And I came to the Ark, and I got clean that day. It was extremely scary, and even being in the program here for the first couple of days, I was still trying to plan how I was going to get drugs, how I was going to sneak drugs into the facility, how I was going to get out of the facility and use drugs, just because getting clean is so unfamiliar, and what is familiar is using. And after going through detox, I think I was in detox for about 2 weeks in a state of severe psychosis and extremely malnourished, extremely sick. But in those 2 weeks, I was introduced to Dr. Dittmanson, and that man invested some time into me because he knew that my next steps were going to be death, and he saw how sick I was. And there were a couple conversations I had with Dr. Dittmanson in those early days of being in detox. I don't remember the whole thing because I was still very out of it, but there were a couple things that he said to me that stuck with me. Because every time I would feel any type of emotion, I said, I need to talk to Dr. Dittmanson. He needs to give me some medication. I need to talk to Dr. D. I'm in pain. I need medication. This went on for a couple days, and Dr. Dittmanson came in and sat me down. And he said something to me that seems extremely simple, but to me, in my addicted brain, I never thought about it like this. And he said, you realize that if you take something every time you feel something, you're not going to get better. That's the disease of addiction. You think you need to numb it, you think you need to fix it with giving yourself something. And he said, that's not the way to get clean. If you always take something to numb yourself or to fix a problem, you're never going to get clean. And that really resonated with me because at that point, I started using at 15 years old. So I essentially stopped growing from that point mentally. And I just assumed that the solution to my problems was taking something. That small conversation that I had with Dr. Dittmanson in the early days of recovery changed my mindset. And so I said, okay, I guess I can't take something to fix my problems. I guess I need to do something else. And so I was introduced to, after getting some clarity, it took me several weeks of being in treatment to gain some clarity, I was introduced to a therapist. This is really, really important in my story, is therapy. I never, ever, ever told anybody about some of the things that happened to me in my life until I got to the ARC and started working with this therapist. And this therapist was just absolutely amazing and such a huge part of my story. I worked with her every day I was here. And during the day, I was safe. And I was at the ARC, and I was safe, and I knew that. I knew that I was safe. I knew that as long as I was here, I wasn't going to use. But I was still in a lot of pain. And I still had the desire to use. And so after working with this therapist, I started telling her things that I swore to myself I'd never tell anybody. I started telling her things, and the relief that I got was unimaginable to me. And so I started to get this idea that I didn't have to be in pain all the time because it was starting to slowly go away. And so then I started to realize that maybe there was a chance for me because my pain was going away, and I didn't think that that was ever possible. And so I was safe when I was in treatment. I was working through therapy. And then at night, I would get in bed, in this amazing bed at the ARC in my room. And I would just say to myself, I can't believe I'm in a bed right now. Because after so many years of sleeping on the streets in a park, it was just like unimaginable to me. So that was how I started to gain some gratitude, was that, oh my God, I look up and I'm not seeing the stars. I'm in a room. Like, I'm not homeless right now. That's where the journey began for me. I started to work through some of the hardest things in my life with this therapist, and then I started to learn things that I didn't even realize I didn't know. I'll never forget. This is an example of how immature I was mentally. I had a lot of street smarts, and I was proud of that. I was proud of that when I came here. I have a lot of street smarts. I'm the coolest person in here. And I realized I wasn't unique. But I was sitting with this lady at dinner one day at the ARC. We were sitting in the cafeteria, and we had some type of meat for dinner. And I was trying to cut up my meat, and this lady looks at me, and she goes, have you never cut meat before? And I said, what do you mean? She goes, you can't cut your meat like that. And she showed me how to use a fork and a knife to cut meat. And at that point, I realized to myself, I'm 20-something years old, and I don't know how to cut up my food. Like, what has happened to me? I realized at that point that I needed to become willing to learn what I didn't know. And it was a humbling moment for me. And so I gained as much knowledge as I possibly could about recovery while I was at this place. And that at that point, a fire was set underneath me. And I was determined that I was not going to use again. I still had the desire to use, but it was less frequent. And I think that's important for people to know, is that the desire to use does not go away instantly. It took a long time for me to completely lose the desire to use drugs. but it was the fact that I was in a safe environment. I was working through some serious trauma, and I was starting to learn skills in life that I didn't even know I didn't have. And I slowly started losing that desire to use and had this desire to beat the disease of addiction. And very soon, the desire to beat addiction started overcoming the desire to use. And so I stayed in treatment, in residential treatment, for about 60 days. I became very comfortable, and because I felt safe. I knew that I was not going to use if I was at the ARC. And after 60 days, everyone's like, all right, it's time for you to go to the next step. And I was like, I don't want to go to the next step. I'm safe here, I want to stay where I'm safe, and I know I'm not going to use, and I like these people, and I don't want to leave these people. And they're like, nope, you got to go to the next step. You don't have a choice. And I'll never forget, it was a crisis for me in my life. I remember calling Michelle, who our COO, and she has been extremely supportive through my whole journey. Called Michelle and I said, they're trying to send me to IOP. I don't want to go to IOP. I want to stay where I'm safe. And she said, Cassie, you got to go to IOP. It's the next step. So with a little bit of encouraging, I went to IOP. And I was in our IOP program for about 6 months. But again, once I moved to IOP, I overcame a challenge that at the time seemed way too overwhelming for me. I didn't want to go. I was going to relapse because I was leaving my safe spot. But I went and I overcame that. And then I realized I liked IOP even better. And I had really great therapists over there, but worked through a lot of my trauma and felt such relief. I felt like I could move on with life. And I was about 3 months clean when I got to IOP. And I'll never forget, I was walking around just like my normal day in IOP. I was putting in a lot of work at that point in myself, a lot of work. I got to a point where I knew I was going to beat the disease of addiction, but I knew that I still had a long journey ahead of me. So I was feeling very confident and comfortable in recovery. And I had seen somebody walking by me in the halls, and they said, hey, why is your dad here? And I said, my dad's not here. What are you talking about? They said, no, I swear I saw your dad. I said, no, you're crazy. My dad's not here. He would have called me and told me he was coming to see me. So I went on about my day, and about an hour later, I got a call from Michelle, and she said, hey, I need you to go down to Dr. Dittmanson's office. I said, okay. So I go in there, and my dad's standing there. I'll never forget that moment in my life. I saw my dad's face. I knew that there was something extremely, extremely wrong. And I saw Dr. Dittmanson in there, which is somebody that I came to trust with my life at this point. And my family knew how much Dr. D impacted my recovery. So they recruited him to do this really hard thing with them. So at the time, my daughter was 3 years old, and I'll never forget the words that came out of Dr. Dittmanson's mouth at that point. He said, this is going to be really hard, but I need you to know that everything's going to be okay. And of course, I was sitting there, I said, what's going on? And he said, Scarlett, my daughter, she was just diagnosed with cancer. And I just remember looking at my dad and just losing it, obviously. And my dad was knew he was scared in the fact that obviously his granddaughter was just diagnosed with cancer. But what was more sad was that he was more worried about me going off the rails and relapsing due to this. And so I sat in that office with Dr. Dittmanson and my dad for a little while and just obviously tried to process. And after that point, it was a journey. But I made the decision in that office that I was not going to use that as an excuse to use. I was going to use that as a way to continue to do what I was doing, but 10 times better. And so from that point on, I knew that I needed to dedicate not only everything to recovery, but being there for my daughter and rebuilding that relationship. And so during the week, I was in IOP here at the ARC. And on Friday, I would take a Greyhound bus every Friday down to Scottsdale to be with my daughter, be with her in the hospital while she was undergoing cancer treatment. And I did this for a very long time until eventually I was able to, my parents gave me a car, and which they had done a couple of times while I had, throughout the years, been trying to get clean or whatever, and they swore they would never do it again. And so they finally gave me a car, and I was able to make the trip by myself back and forth. And there's no pain like seeing your child in the hospital going through some type of cancer treatment or treatment in general like that. But she lost all of her hair. She went through chemo, and it was brutal, but it empowered me to be able to look at her and know that my child would never have to see me in active using ever again. And at that point, I decided that I was going to get involved in a 12-step program so that while I was at the hospital during the weekends, I could go do something that still fed my recovery while I was still, not at the ARC. So I got involved in a 12-step program. And while I was down there, I would go to a meeting and then go back to the hospital, spend the night at the hospital with my daughter. And then I came back here during the week. And then I started getting involved in a program down here in Tucson. And at the time, I would take the bus during the week 2 times a day to a meeting. Started getting involved in the fellowship. I got a sponsor, and I started learning to trust other people on the outside that weren't at the ARC, because the ARC was my comfortable place. And it was really important for me to learn how to live outside of the ARC as well. And there's this saying that we have in recovery is in the rooms is that we'll love you until you learn to love yourself. And that was my stories, that everybody just wrapped me up in their arms, especially going through all this stuff with my daughter and being newly clean. And I was shown how to live not only from the ARC, but after the ARC through 12 steps. And this August, I'll have 5 years clean.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Congratulations, my friend.
Thank you. And, after I left the ARC, I eventually got hired on at the ARC. And I have a very great position here now. And I'm super grateful for somebody who has a past like mine to have a great job. And my daughter eventually made it through all of her chemo and cancer treatments.
Praise God.
Yeah, and she was declared cancer-free almost 3 years ago. This last year, I gained custody of my child back. It's been almost 2 years now, and I moved her down here to Tucson. And last December, I purchased a home, and I met my boyfriend about 3 years ago now. And we just had a baby in December. And so at this point in my life, I own my own home. I have 2 amazing children. I have a wonderful boyfriend. I have a great job. But one thing that I have continued to do through my whole experience is that recovery is first in my life no matter what. Because I learned really quickly in recovery that if recovery isn't first, then everything that has come above it, I will slowly start to lose. And so I still maintain a very strong program of recovery, 12 steps, and I have a home group. I meet weekly. I have a sponsor. I work steps. And then I still try my best to share my story with the people who come through at ARC and let them know that the ARC was ultimately the place that saved my life. If it wasn't for the ARC, I truly don't believe I would have made it through the disease of addiction, whatever that looks like. And I'll be forever grateful for that experience and for the seed that was ultimately planted in my head. I think there were a lot of circumstances that led me here, but if it wasn't for the ARC, I truly don't think I would have made it through the disease of addiction.
Wow.
It's amazing.
That is a powerful
testimony. Yeah.
Thank you for your story.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Wow. So listening to your story is very inspirational. For one, I applaud you for everything that you've been through. Mm-hmm. My baby girl is 10 years old. And I see that innocence in her, and I see just, how beautiful she is, and, and I just see how important it is for us to, to love our kids and to be there for our kids so much. So, like, to see all the trials and tribulations that you've been through, they say where much given, much is required. Mm-hmm. Just everything about your testimony, even, one of the key parts of it to me that really stuck out was when you were talking about how your dad was here and he was doing like a tour of the facility, like how God lines everything up sometimes, but it's up to us ultimately to make those choices because he's there, but he ain't going to force us to do nothing. We have to do that on our own. That is a choice that we have to make. So, Miss Cassie, when you were talking about being at that rest stop, that last moment before you came to ARC, was that like, how was that experience? Was that already something in your head that you had decided, like, this is the last time? Like, I'm not doing this right now? Like, I'm sure at that moment, I know you said later on that you were already thinking of other ways to bring stuff in, but at that moment in time, was that like a very significant moment for you?
Definitely is, and I tell a lot of people about that because I remember in that instance, my dad knew what I was doing when I got out of the car and said I need to go to the bathroom. At that point, he knew that I was probably doing whatever I do. But I remember that. I remember using for the last time, and I said to myself, goodbye. You know, I said goodbye to my drug of choice. I will definitely always remember that. And at the time, I fully believed that was the last time I was going to use. It wasn't until later when I was getting sick that I even contemplated, you know, oh, maybe I'm not ready for this or not. But yeah, it was definitely a moment I'll never forget.
That's amazing. I was going to say, is there anything from your family standpoint, because I know you mentioned they set boundaries, but was there any moments that like stuck out to you that they did that were things that encouraged you? You know, I think the timing of your dad calling was amazing, but were they constantly showing you love? Did you ever have moments where you didn't feel that from them?
Yeah, my family was great, and they always have been so great and encouraging. There comes a point, though, you can only do so much to your family before they have to make a decision for the rest of your family to put up those boundaries. Mm-hmm. And obviously, at first in my addiction, they would have done absolutely anything to do anything for me to get anywhere, to get better. Yeah. And then after so many years of me betraying them and doing some pretty messed up things to them, as far as stealing, you know, breaking their trust, they set a boundary. Mostly when my daughter came into the picture, they took custody of her. And at that point, that was their main priority, was to keep her safe. And they knew that to keep her safe, they had to keep me away. Not to say that they didn't love me from afar. They always answered the phone when I called. They always told me, if you want to go to treatment, we'll help you get there. But them setting those boundaries, it was needed for me. It was definitely needed for me.
Do you know boundaries actually are a form of love?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I have a cousin that is now, you know, totally been living a sober life for, I've lost count of the years, but my aunt and my uncle had to set clear boundaries. He wasn't allowed in the home, but he could sleep on the porch. But because you have to do that, because at that point, it's not you that's doing it, it's the drug. And so it's not them not showing you love, it's them, you know, drawing the line in the sand of, we've got to get past that, the drug and the disease that takes over.
That's exactly what they realized that they had to do, and it was the best thing, I believe, for me to get to where I ended up.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, how wonderful, just all the things that you overcame, and then to come through it and be hit with something that a lot of people would be like, wow, this is just a toss in the towel, and you used it for motivation. I think that takes a very strong person to do that. So
there's this thing called reservations, and it's things you start working through in treatment. Like, if X were to happen, what would you do? Or you write down reservations that you would, if this happens, I'm definitely going to use, or if this happens, I'm definitely going to have to use over it. And that's one thing that I had as a reservation. If my child were to ever get sick, I would probably use. And then when that actually happened to me, it was extremely empowering that my mind didn't automatically think to, oh, I need to use to fix this, because that would have been my past mentality. It was the complete opposite. I need to stay clean to be able to fix this. And it was pretty crazy that's how my mind had switched to thinking over, you know, some time of clarity and help and skill building.
You know, so awesome about what you just now said, because I'm sitting here reading all these different scriptures that are just showing me how you literally are walking this thing out in the way that you should go. And then what you just now talked about your mind, it says here in 1 Peter, be sober-minded, because I was thinking the whole time, wow, look how long it took, and then you got there, and you've been sober-minded now for 5 years. Mm-hmm. It says, be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. And that means, to me, relapse. So the things that you've been going through, you're really going to be able to offer hope to so many. So thank you so much for your position here at ARC.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for, you know, your testimony. I think it's important to hear every, you know, the details, like how you spoke about, because I think about it, you know, with my family. There's different members in my family in certain different situations around the family right now where we've had to either set boundaries, or we have other family that's not living the right way, you know, and it really is hard. As a father, as a husband, we want to do everything that we can for our kids. We want to make sure that they're always safe. You know, I look at my little son and my little daughter laying in bed at night, and to me, it's like that prideful feeling of knowing that they're home and I can take care of them if anything happens, you know. But like, you know, growing up, being somebody who experienced addiction from different angles growing up, you know, it was there is a certain time when you do have to create those boundaries, and it's okay. It's okay for family to have to do that sometimes, because, you know, ultimately at the end of it, when somebody gets clean, when somebody gets sober, the family, I think it's important for family to realize too that we have to be able to meet each other halfway. I see it on both ends where, you know, let's say a family member has an addiction problem, they get good, and for some reason the family that was supporting them, they're starting to hold grudges or whatever it may be. And it's important for us to unify and come together and to support each other and to be able to help each other, because it really does take a village. It does. And that testimony, Cassie, that you spoke about, your kids or anybody in your life that loves you and cares about you, you're living by example. You're living by example, and you're showing that you don't have to give up. They're giving people hope, and I think that's the most powerful thing in the world.
I agree. And that's one thing when I look at my kids, I think to myself, because we make amends, you know, when we're in recovery for all the harm that we've done. What I was told is, how will I ever make amends to my child? And I was told, you're making a living amends by your child never having to see you high again. That's a living amends to your child. That doesn't even need to be said. But for the rest of their life, they'll never see you getting high again. That's what stuck with me.
Yeah, and I got to meet your little girl at the 5-year anniversary, and she is
sweet.
just the cutest thing. So how amazing, too, that you can see, like, her and you, but in positive ways. You know, like I heard your testimony for the first time today, and I just remember her skipping right beside you. I'm like, they're the cutest little mom-daughter duo ever. So it's like how outsiders now looking in can see you, and now hearing your testimony even like aspire to encourage someone they love to keep going.
So you moms that are in their 20s and 30s that have young kids, I want you to hear this story, because what she's done is really proven that they can beat those diseases before their kids even grow up to even see them.
Absolutely. And how sweet of knowing that little smile on her face every day, the imagination, all of that, you know, she's able to have that because she has people around her who love and care about her. I think that's amazing. I had one other question for you that I was curious, you know, going back to the family thing, like I was saying, because to me, it hits me close to home. When you got clean and sober, how did the relationship change with your family? Like when you were like going 100, you know?
My family always empowered me and encouraged me, but it was a long road to mend the relationship with my family. And there was no trust between my family and I. And with me going down every weekend to Phoenix, it happened a lot sooner than my family would have preferred. They would have kept me away from Phoenix forever if they could have. But with the circumstances, I was going down there every weekend. They were always nervous, always second-guessing what I was doing. You know, I would say, okay, I'm going to go to a meeting, and then I'll be back to the hospital. And that trust wasn't there because of my actions. And I was aware of that. And so I knew that I was going to have to put in the work to gain the trust from my family back. And it took quite some time, over years. And I won't say that it's ever gone back to how it was before I was an addict, but it took time, and it took me making an amends, you know, setting down each of my family members and making complete amends with each of them before we were able to move past it. And that was really important in my recovery and in starting to build that relationship with my family again. We have a great relationship today, and awesome. They just... Obviously, they wish I was in Phoenix now. They never wanted me back there, but now, of course, they wish I was there because of the grandkids, and they're really proud of me, and they come down and they visit, and we go up and we visit. We just still do all the family stuff, and it's great.
Thank you so much once again, Cassie. Hearing your testimony, like I said, it was extremely powerful. I applaud you for the woman that you are, for everything that you've overcame, everything. I think it's a beautiful thing. I really, really do, and it's amazing to me. You know, there's so many people nowadays, like just growing up and hearing everybody, like there's so many kids growing up without their families. There's so much heartache in this world. This world is getting so worse, you know, and to know that you are a living example of somebody who was able to change that. You know, I hope you know how powerful that is every single day. And from now on, moving forward, I'm going to make sure I let you know, because I think that's fantastic. I think it's fantastic. So thank you so much for coming on here and sharing that with us today, Cassie. I really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Anybody want to throw anything else out there?
I think she said it all.
Yeah, I think so too. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for tuning in to another very special episode of the ArtCast. Once again, if you guys have any questions or you guys want to be a part of the ArtCast, you can hit us up at the ArtCast6944@gmail.com. You know, let us know if you guys want to be a part of it. We thank you once again for listening. Much love, and God bless everybody. Bye-bye. What's going on, everybody? This is Buddha from the Arcast, and I just wanted to thank you for checking out this week's episode. It means a lot, and if you could share it with a friend or a loved one, somebody in need in recovery, or maybe somebody who just needs that little bit of extra positivity in their life, we'd greatly appreciate it. If you would like to join us here on the Arcast, either in the studio live or online, hit us up. The links are down in the show notes of this episode, and on there, you can find direct links to our main website here at Americas Rehab Campus and all of our social media platforms. Follow us. We keep the posts positive and motivational, focused on recovery, health, and wellness. As you know, in this modern day and age, we need as much love as possible, y'all. And as always, if you or somebody you know is in need of substance abuse treatment, please don't hesitate to give us a call. We're open 24 hours a day, and our direct phone number is 1-833-272-7342. Once again, that phone number is 1-833-272-7342. I hope you all have a beautiful rest of your day. Much love and God bless. Peace.